So we've got two components, a login and a list of patients, and now we need the nurse to be able to register a new patient. This is requirement 3, and we do that in Logiak via an interactive dialog called process. So here we can define processes. Let's add a process called register patient. And we go into the process. A process consists of a sequence of steps. The steps can be user interactions, background actions, or groupings of steps. We know we need a couple of user interactions because we want to know from the user what is the patient's name. We can give a symbolic value name there. And what is the patient's date of birth. And we can give a symbolic value name there that we can refer to the value later. So we've got two interactions. Now we want to use the values that the user has given us in those interactions to create an instance of patient in the database. We do that via one of these background actions. We can create background actions of various kinds. One of them is create object instance. So if we specify the kind of thing we want to create, what we need to do then is we need to say for each field in that instance of patient, where do we want the values to come from? Well, clearly we've used the same symbolic names for the values that in the process that we've got in the object, so we can accept this automatic mapping, and we have these two values that we've entered, date of birth and name, mapped to the correct fields in the database object. Temperature we're going to leave for the time being. We don't need a value for every field. We get default values. So now we have a process. We have a step-by-step process. We're going to ask the user patient's name, patient's date of birth. If we want to, we can group these two together in a screen. Screen 1, where we can put the patient's name and patient's date of birth as two interactions appear together. So we've got this process now, and we go back to the component view, and we're going to introduce that component, that process as a component. So we add a process component, and we choose the process we've defined. So now we've got that process as a component that we can include in this component flow. Where do we want to include it? Well, we've got this patient listing, and if we double click on there, and we see what the listing kind of looks like. This is randomly generated data, of course. We don't have any patients yet. What we would like is maybe in a control here which allows the user to say, okay, I want to add a patient to this list. And we can do that. We simply choose this add transition and select a component, namely the register patient component. And then once we've got an add transition defined, we get this button which will call this process that we've defined. So now we have, and we can preview that, an application where the nurse logs in, requirement 1, sees the patient listing. It's empty at the moment, that's requirement 2. And now we can add a patient by adding name and date of birth. And then we've got a patient in the patient list, that's requirement 3.